I'm Dr Karl, coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians and traditional custodians of the lands where we live, learn and work. G'day, Dr Karl here, University of Sydney Shirtloads of Science with Dr Matt Agnew, desperately trying to get to Is My Phone Reading My Mind, your new book, having gone through your many years of university education in engineering and science and applied mathematics and computer science, and working in engineering in Western Australia and doing a PhD and a master's degree in astrophysics and becoming a fabulously handsome bachelor person with a relationship that fell over after, a year or so? Or
6 months.
I find that in some cases the people grow apart and there's no hard feelings, like you grow in different directions. Anyway, so we'll just delicately draw a veil and talk about your book.
Yes.
Is My Phone Reading My Mind? And my story, to get you started, is that some friends of mine had a dog, and the dog was really old, and it was going to die soon, but they loved the dog. They wanted to keep it alive as long as possible, but it needed some very expensive dental surgery. And they talked about this at the dinner table for 2 days without ever searching for dental surgery. And suddenly after 2 days, they started getting dog dental surgery ads, each of them. There's a few possibilities there, aren't there?
Yeah, there's probably two parts to this. The first is the richness of the data, and the amount of data available is such that it can do things predictively that seem a little, not unintuitive, but like magic almost.
Because it is true that the stuff on our phones is being sent back to the mothership and being recorded, as on the Alexa, and I'm imagining the same be on the Google Home thingies.
They need to know when you mention something because, hey Alexa, it's got to be listening, right?
To be able to. So they're always listening. The phone is always listening, and in some cases, what you are saying to discussing the neighbours next door or anything else is being sent back to the mothership.
But it shouldn't be getting processed. It should be.
Well, why send it back?
Well, I mean, it's probably for some. It's a good
quality
question,
and monitoring
actually.
Purposes.
Quality. I mean, Facebook got done. What was it? It was a decade or so ago because their Facebook app was doing it, so it wasn't even a Google Home or an Alexa type thing. But I have got a Google Home, but I can't remember the T's and C's and I consent to this. But I believe in that consenting thing. It's got. These will be recorded for, as you said, monitoring purposes. Whether or not they actually are processing it is another story.
But they could if they wanted to.
They have the data,
if they wanted to. If you're enough of a threat to the state, if you're an enemy to the state, they could monitor every conversation that happens near your phone.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned there was a story where the FBI made a request.
The state of Arkansas, a bunch of men got around to drink beer and watch a football match, and one of them was found dead in the morning floating face down in a swimming pool or spa. And foul play was suspected, so the cops got involved. And there was an Alexa unit in another room, not the TV room, but it was still able to pick up the conversations, and they managed to force Amazon to open up that data, so they had it stored.
Yes.
And it turned out it wasn't foul play, it was just men being stupid by drinking too much.
Yes.
But that was a clear proof that what you say is not only being transmitted back to the relevant mothership, but is being recorded.
Yes. So, in those cases, as I said, I believe when you consent, it's not to be processed.
Okay. So in your book, Is My Phone Reading My Mind, you go through 7 chapters.
Yes.
What is artificial intelligence? Where do we find AI in our everyday lives is number 2. What are the ethics? Number 3. What's unintended bias? Number 4. 5. How can AI be used? Yes, I've been used on me with making deepfakes of my face and voice to promote various bad products. How can AI impact people? Big ways. All AI control problems and robo-ethics. Where do you want to start?
What is artificial intelligence? Is a good starting point.
Well, so it's kind of been around-ish. And bear in mind that there's 2 forms. One is generative and the other one is general. And generative is just word prediction like on your phone on steroids. And the other one is actually true intelligence. And nobody's got true intelligence yet.
No. I'd say in AI circles, that's probably the holy grail is artificial general intelligence for sure.
And all the AI people I've spoken to have said, what we think AI today, when we look back in 20 years, that's not AI.
Yeah.
Then we'll have real AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, in 20 years. Maybe.
And I think probably we do that a little bit with prior to generative AI, so under the umbrella of artificial intelligence is, I guess, machine learning algorithms, which is sort of up until generative AI. If someone talked about using AI, they were usually talking about machine learning. And I'd say in the same way we look back at some of the more early machine learning algorithms that fundamentally at their core are sort of just extrapolation models. In the same way now we look at generative AI and there's that quite a big chasm. I think to your friend's point, there's probably a similar situation we'll have where 20 years from now we look back and we think, oh yeah, that wasn't quite AI compared to what we have now.
So give us a specific example.
In the past or what it will look like in the future? When did the
first sort of AI appear? How long ago?
Ballpark, I would say in the 90s, there was kind of these sort of linear extrapolation models and really early machine learning algorithms.
But the processors were much slower back then.
That's
and
it.
The data that they had access to was much less. In fact, the World Wide Web got invented only on the 25th of December 1990.
Yeah.
So you really needed the World Wide Web to put bots on there so that they could scrape data like crazy.
Correct. The I'd say the bottleneck has typically been data and compute power. Probably saw a bigger explosion in the noughties at the turn of the millennium because the internet obviously started really churning out data. We started getting more powerful processors that were accessible. You started getting kind of a lot more supercomputers that were accessible to academia rather than just, I guess, defense and things like that. And so in academic circles, you would have seen machine learning algorithms starting to be deployed on these supercomputers.
Right. So before we leave part one, what is artificial intelligence? Just give us a kind of a definition.
AI is algorithms that can solve problems autonomously or semi-autonomously.
What would be such a problem that you'd want them to solve?
So I use kind of examples that we have in everyday life because I think that's a good way to encapsulate how AI is being used. But fraud detection with credit cards, I think, is a really good use case. Because
how does that work?
So the way that works is the banks will be able to track your transactions on your credit card, including geographic data.
Yep.
And suddenly there's a transaction in another country. So this is a very, very simple scenario, but suddenly there's a transaction in another country. It's been tracing all your transactions and they're all localized within Sydney. There's this transaction in London. Makes no sense, flags it up, halts the transaction, potentially freezes the card, and then contacts you and says there's anomalous activity going on. Are you in London? Was that you? Because that transaction has taken place.
So that's one case in your second chapter where we find AI in our everyday lives. Can you give us another example?
Something that I think everyone probably uses, maybe even daily, would be Netflix and Spotify recommendation engines.
Oh.
So when you first start using Netflix, you might get served up certain recommendations, and that's probably powered by, all right, you live in Sydney. Within Sydney, these are the top 10 shows, have
and
a
your
crack.
age is such and such, and your gender, your sex is such and such, and you got so many kids, or you rent, or all sorts of stuff.
But then as you start watching, firstly it measures what you watch, but then also you notice there's the thumbs up and thumbs down at the end, and so you can engage actively by giving a thumbs up and thumbs down, which helps.
Do you do that?
I don't. I think I've done it once with a really bad movie. I did a thumbs down because I thought I want none of that. But even if you don't, the fact that you watched the movie, that's still a positive signal. If you watch a movie and you stop halfway through and never come back, that's a negative signal. So it's still got a way to measure your sentiment with regards to the movie.
Right.
And then so it kind of collates that all and it says, okay, based on what you're watching, there might be 1,000 other people who watch very similar shows or the same shows themselves. They also liked movie X. I'm going to serve up to you movie X to watch because based on your profile of what you're enjoying and what other people that enjoy similar films to you watching, movie X is really good.
Okay. And then you move on to chapter 3. What are the ethics? And you break it down into two varieties.
Yeah, so Kantian and utilitarian are the two we jump into.
What was Kant's first name?
Emmanuel.
Emmanuel, K-A-N-T, from Germany. And so the other one was utilitarian.
Utilitarian.
So is utilitarian the greatest good for the greatest number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between the greatest good for the greatest number, utilitarian, and the Kantian?
Kantian ethics. So Kantian is sort of, if everyone did this, would it be good?
Oh, if everybody did the action that you're proposing, would this be good to society?
Yes.
Would it be good to who? The people who did the action, or the people to whom the action was done, or society in general?
Yeah, society in general.
Society in general.
Yeah, so it's a little harder to define and take scenarios and put them through the Kantian lens as compared to utilitarian. I think utilitarian is very easy and quite relatable because it's just saying do we do this because one person gets punished, or we do this because no one gets punished?
So we're using this to hopefully use some form of ethics for looking at our future use of AI. And you give the example of stealing a chocolate bar.
Yes.
Take us through that from the two different points of ethics.
Yeah, so Kantian says if everyone steals chocolate bars, does that lead to a good society? And you'd argue probably not, because I pinch your chocolate bar, but then someone pinches mine, and then someone else takes mine, and then I take two, and someone else takes two, and everyone's just stealing chocolate bars. There's no repercussions for anyone, and it kind of just turns into chocolate stealing anarchy. Not a particularly pleasant scenario.
And what about the people who bought the chocolate bars in the first place in the shop?
Well, they've been obviously completely rorted. They've lost all their chocolate bars, so they've lost. The people who have stolen them, if they've been stolen back, they've lost. There might be some winners maybe, but overwhelmingly society is not really operating in a positive fashion.
But what about the utilitarian point of view?
So utilitarian would be saying, all right, if someone steals a chocolate bar, has the greatest number of people benefited? So under utilitarian, if you own a store and I steal a chocolate bar, it's kind of doesn't really say yes or no whether that was a good thing, because there's two of us. I've benefited, but you've been punished.
Yeah.
If I steal a chocolate bar because me and my friend are hungry, utilitarian ethics would argue that, well, that's actually ethically okay, because you've been punished by losing financially, but two people have benefited by eating some food. But then you can expand it further. Maybe you own the shop with 10 other people. So me stealing the chocolate bar, now there's 10 other people who have been kind of, they're less well off, negatively affected compared to just the two. So it's easy, I think, to apply the lens, but you need to have the whole picture to really understand if utilitarian ethics dictate whether something's good or bad.
I imagine there'd be other forms of ethics that we could apply as well.
Yep.
So moving into two, what's unintended bias? You ask in part 4 of your book.
Yeah, so unintended bias. Bias is predisposition to think something. I use a really great example in the book about swans, where in Europe, everyone thought swans are white. All swans are white. The bias is if you find a swan, it will be white. Then they visited Western Australia and they discovered black swans. And so they had a bias that all swans are white, because throughout their lives, that bias was consistently reinforced by the fact that every swan they encountered was white. The reality is black swans always existed. It was just there was no interaction or observation of such a swan. And so the bias had kind of like skewed the Europeans' understanding of reality. So bias happens unintentionally. It's not like they set out to decide to, misunderstand swans, but it happens to us regardless. Unintended bias is exactly that. It's unintentional. And this happens because data reflects reality. Any bias that we have currently in existence in our own reality will be reflected in the data.
So you mentioned then the case of an AI algorithm to determine who gets bail or who gets remand.
Sentencing. Yeah.
And if they'll get parole after a certain period of time in some of the states of the USA. So take us through that.
There was a case in the States, I can't remember which state it was, but they had, for sentencing, they had a machine learning algorithm to assist with sentencing. And it was trained on the data of incarcerated individuals within America broadly.
Oh.
And we know America has a problem with incarceration in that African American people are
overrepresented, massively overrepresented,
hugely overrepresented in prison, and so there's this huge skew in the data. So what that means is that racist systemic issue that permeates American culture is now part of the data the machine learning algorithm has been trained on. So now that machine learning data has this racial bias. It's racist because of the data that it's been fed. And this came to a point in the States where the sentencing of black people was being hugely over-sentenced, in that black people with maybe no priors, no history of crime.
No prior conviction.
No prior conviction. They were getting higher sentences than you'd expect them to because of this racist data. But not only that, but you saw the counterexample as well with white people getting under-sentenced, because again, there was this unintended bias, and even if the white person had way more prior convictions and a criminal record, they were getting sentenced less than black people with far less convictions or maybe none at all.
Yet this was now AI being used to affect the lives of actual humans.
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
And so the algorithm itself, it's not programmed to be racist, but because it is trained on data that reflects reality, the systemic racism in America was funneled through the data into the algorithm, unintentionally creating a racist algorithm.
Wow. Number 5, how can AI be misused?
I think the biggest example of AI misuse would be deep faking.
Of images, still and moving and voices.
And audio, yeah. Probably the most well understood misuse. There's many ways that AI can be misused or outright abused, but the deep fakes, I think, is the one that they've either heard about, read something about, or they've actually seen it themselves, just so that they can see how unsettling it can be. One of the recent examples just highlights how awful it is, which was a couple of months ago. There was a high school male student who was creating deep fake nudes of female students in his classes.
We're talking in August 24.
Absolutely abhorrent usage of AI, and this is one of the ways that deep fakes can impact people's lives when it's unregulated and not governed, and there's no guardrails or safety protections in place. And there's a problem there, both from an education standpoint. How did that male student get to a point through the education system where not only did that idea cross his mind, but he acted on it?
You go on social media, you'll come across pretty well everything that's good and bad in human society.
Absolutely. And that's another, I think, misuse of AI, right, is the increasing polarization of people's thinking. And, you know, if you have unfettered access to YouTube or social media, you can slowly get nudged down this more and more radicalized rabbit hole of misogyny. And that's clearly something that happened in this case. The deep fakes, they can be used in really awful ways, and that's a very personal, intimate, invasion of people's privacy.
Being used to misuse.
Yeah, being misused. But it can also be, there could be someone creates a deep fake of a political rival.
And that's been done.
And that's been done. When you can no longer trust your eyes and ears, it makes for a really problematic situation.
Well, an article came through recently in Australia. The majority of people get their medical information not from Dr. Google, which is searching on the search engine, but rather from social media. And secondly, it said that of the medical information on TikTok, the amount that was correct was 2%. Not 98.
Wild.
But 2. And I've been on there saying, actually, celery juice will not cure cancer, done various other medical issues, and I've been working from the peer-reviewed literature, and I've been attacked for being wrong by people who have not searched the medical literature, but just have been told this by somebody in a store. They said, but I bought some of the juice and now I feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. They're arguing with someone with a medical degree because someone said celery juice.
Yeah, and they spent money on it. And number 6 in your book, how can AI impact people? We've kind of covered that, but tell us more.
Yeah, I think this chapter as well, I dive into a little bit about the impacts of being replaced, I guess, in a labour context.
Oh.
So as AI becomes better at certain tasks, when it starts being able to replace certain jobs, what does that look like for humans? And I think there's this sort of inevitability to it. There's certain jobs that I think are really ripe for being replaced. I think one of the huge upsides of AI is it could help change what it means to make a living. What does that actually look like? And it's obviously been fairly well established for a long time in modern society. You sleep X number of hours a day, you work X numbers of hours a day, and you have this much time a day for your hobbies and pastimes. And maybe we can shake that up. And I think we've discussed before about UBI, Universal Basic Income.
Yeah, look it up in Wikipedia.
Yep. And I think that kind of, in conjunction with being able to offload a lot of tedious mental labour to AI, means that potentially we can change what making a living looks like, in that we can have more free time for hobbies, passions, and importantly, I think, relationships and family and friends and things like that. And that's where ultimately I think is what really enriches our lives. And I think that's one of the really strong potential upsides to AI. And I'm very optimistic that that's what it will help us achieve.
Do you think there should be some degree of government or societal supervision, or should it be allowed to run totally driven by a profit motive?
The former. I think absolutely. At the moment, there's inadequate, if any at all, regulation, right? And so I think we're playing with AI live. We're just doing it live without necessarily thinking things through. And that means the big tech that are creating the AI that are completely motivated by profit, they're the ones kind of calling the shots and directing its use case and application. And so I think, yeah, there needs to be regulation and legislation put in place that's going to come through governance. And when governments decide to do that, there needs to be, input from society. There needs to be input from policymakers, but there doesn't still need to be participation from big tech, because ultimately they're the ones who will be incorporating and making the changes that are necessary.
Well, we haven't had much successful government intervention supervision with social media so far. Let's hope things get better. Chapter 7, which is not the end because you've got conclusion after that, but you're saying AI control problems and robo-ethics. Are you talking about my beloved Asimov's 3 laws of robotics?
We jump in a bit here, yeah. So we have control over AI right now, but as we approach this sort of general intelligence, will there be a point where it approaches our intelligence and potentially surpasses it? And how do we maintain control in those circumstances? So we don't need a solution now, but at some point, I think, the relentless march of technology development means that it will likely get to a point where we need to consider this. And so it's worth thinking about now. The other portion of that, again, it's a more kind of creative, exploratory area, the last chapter. The robo-ethics piece being, again, as AI approaches human-like intelligence, do we need to consider the ethics of robots themselves and AI themselves? At what point do we consider their sentience or consciousness is such that we need to consider the ethics of I guess, robot or AI rights? It's stuff that I think at some point between now and the future need to be considered seriously.
Science fiction writer Isaac Asimov took one pathway, which was robots and a whole bunch of stories and the 3 laws of robotics, and another pathway in a foundation series where robots were banned.
Yes.
Right. And robots and artificial intelligence were banned. Possibilities.
Two extremes,
okay,
yeah.
So now your conclusion, your big wrap-up.
The big takeaways, I think, are that it's already hugely involved in all parts of our lives. And
it's already here.
It's already here. And almost certainly anytime you pick up a piece of tech, there's probably a piece of AI attached to it in some capacity.
Wow.
AI's here. We're using it already. There are ethical considerations, and there's, a right way and a wrong way to use AI. It's important we understand the right ways and wrong ways to use it. At the moment, the regulation, legislation, governance, safety nets, guide rails, whatever you want to call it, are hugely inadequate. And so it's important that until those things are in place, we leverage education of AI itself to help provide our own guardrails until those things catch up. Because I think, as you said, with social media, we haven't even got to a point where there's adequate regulation. And historically, we can see that's not moving quickly enough. And so I think that's where education has a place for filling that gap until those things catch up. But ultimately, don't be scared of it. It's here. It can be misused. We need to address that. And like I said, I'm really optimistic that we'll get to a place where we can unload some of that tedious mental burden and reclaim our free time, which we can really sink into the things that enrich our lives, such as relationships.
What a lovely finish. Now, how can people follow you in your fine work, Dr. Matt Agnew, author of Is My Phone Reading My Mind?
So the best ways will be through Instagram and TikTok.
Yep.
My handle is Dr. Matt Agnew, so DrMattAgnew. I talk about all the latest things I'm doing. So in this case, it's a lot of book stuff, but I also create my own science content and love to field questions. So I encourage people to slide into my DMs with their questions, and then I can get around to addressing them and creating a nice little piece of content out of it.
And DM is Hip Talk for direct message.
That's it.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Matt.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Shirtloads of Science is washed, spun and aired by the University of Sydney.